p.m., November 25th, 2025, Town Board Study Session, Town of Estes Park. Our first topic, guiding philosophy for events. I was hoping we would get something about philosophy on here eventually, and we do. Management Analyst, Susanna Simpson.
I know how to keep it light. Thank you. All right, good evening, Mayor and Trustees. Susanna Simpson, Management Analyst, and I am here to discuss the guiding philosophy for events with you this evening. So your 2025 strategic plan includes an objective to develop a guiding philosophy for events that includes consideration of impact on businesses and the community. So the purpose of this report is to share results of feedback gathered on events, discuss the elements of a guiding philosophy for events, and review a draft of an events philosophy created by staff for discussion purposes. So we are seeking direction from the board on what elements should be included in the guiding philosophy, how the philosophy should be incorporated into the operations of the Events and Visitor Services Department. And then we are also asking for specific feedback on whether Bond Park should be reserved only for civic uses, publicly owned events, or events that support nonprofits, and should the prominence of alcohol at events be addressed. Stakeholder interviews were conducted with our Events and Visitor Services Director, the Estes Chamber of Commerce Director, Visit Estes Park Operations Director, and our Police Chief. Municipal research was conducted on the mountain communities of Aspen, Avon, Breckenridge, Frisco, Glenwood Springs, Pagosa Springs, Snowmass Village, and Vail, and then neighboring communities of Boulder, Brighton, Broomfield, Fort Collins, Longmont, Loveland, Lyons, and Windsor. And we also conducted a survey to get public feedback. So the purpose of that survey was to gauge resident and business sentiment, to understand the barriers to participation, the types of events people want to see more and fewer of, and to understand the impact that events have on the business community. It's important to note that not every event was included in the survey. The focus was on town signature events, larger private events held at town event spaces, and events that take place in the downtown corridor. The survey was open for 18 days and had 198 responses. It was categorized by resident, business owner, or manager, and then both resident and business owner or manager. 79% of respondents were residents, 1% were business owners or managers, 16% were both residents and business owners or managers, and then 4% were categorized as other. The events were mostly rated as excellent or good. 50% of respondents are satisfied with the current number of events, while 40% stated that they would like to see fewer events and 10% would like to see more events. Of the choices offered, cost was the largest prohibitive factor for attending events, but 25% of respondents wrote in other reasons, including crowds, traffic, parking, and alcohol. And then the top concerns identified across all of the text responses were traffic with 50 mentions. This was the most common logistical complaint, especially regarding downtown congestion during busy weekends. Parking at 48 mentions, specifically a lack of parking, suggestions of improved signage and more coordination being needed during large events. Alcohol got 47 mentions, most often raised as a request for fewer alcohol-centric events. And then crowds had 19 mentions. The large crowds at many downtown events are a barrier to resident attendance. So residents want more winter events, nature and wildlife themed events, musical performances, family-friendly events, and food-focused events. They want fewer alcohol-centric events, downtown events, and repetitive events. The business respondents want more winter events, educational events, cultural events, and family-friendly events. And they want fewer arts and craft shows, alcohol-centric events, and those that charge a fee for entry with additional vendor charges. So we asked the question about the overall impact of downtown events on business, and 38% of respondents rated that as neutral, 22% as positive, 19% as negative. And then the overall impact of events on the local business community was rated as positive by 58%, extremely positive by 15%, neutral by 12%, and negative by 6%. So some opportunities identified in the research. First, collaboration. A high level of collaboration is a key component to success in all facets of the event process. Both internal and external partners do play a significant role in mitigating issues around business impact and participation, traffic, parking challenges, and resident sentiment. Programs that encourage business participation in events, such as the Beyond program, should be highlighted and promoted. Bond Park events. These events have the biggest impact on traffic and downtown businesses. Currently, there are 11 events in Bond Park each year. 2 are private for-profit events. The business sentiment is mixed on these events. They were not noted to have a negative impact on business, but respondents noted frustration that many events feel repetitive, such as the arts and crafts shows. They sold products that were perceived to compete with downtown businesses, and they created the most congestion in town. Number 3, alcohol-centric events. There are currently 8 events that advertise alcohol. These events are popular among attendees, though overall resident sentiment from the survey was not favorable. Eliminating current successful events is not recommended, but the Events and Visitor Services team could carefully weigh the benefits of adding any new events that advertise alcohol. It's worth noting that the police department does not see an increase in public safety issues or incidents during these events. Public transportation options should be available, contracted, and promoted for these events. Number 4, family-friendly events. An event would be considered family-friendly if it is affordable and appropriate for all ages, and many of the town's current events can be considered family-friendly and could be advertised as such. And then finally, lessons and ideas from other communities. Estes Park is fairly unique in its approach to events, largely because of the variety of venues and well-established signature events. A few notable mountain community approaches. The town of Frisco emphasizes a neighborhood feel approach to the events that they produce, holding several seasonal events designed for participants to engage with local businesses. Telluride has a very challenging event season, holding 45 events over a 22-week period on town property alone. They've established a series of policies with specific criteria to review, including the length of time an event has been in existence on the specific requested date, the longevity of the event in town, the longevity of the organization in town, and the value to the community from a cultural, economic, environmental, and social perspective, among other items. And then finally, Aspen has evolved their event philosophy over the years, narrowing their focus to signature events that create a community connection. Athletic events that were once produced by the city are now privately managed. Their guiding mandate is to produce events that are free or low cost, community-driven, environmentally responsible, and designed with locals in mind. So what is currently guiding the Events and Visitor Services Department is their mission to provide residents and guests with resources, extraordinary events, and venues to enhance the quality of life in Estes Park and to ensure that Estes Park remains a vibrant mountain community and premier destination. The positive feedback from event attendees, as well as the results of economic impact surveys, demonstrates that the department, is thoughtful in their approach and prioritizes measuring the impact of events. Timing of events. This is another area approached with thoughtful consideration by balancing events across the year and throughout the week and utilizing performance measurements to help establish targets and track metrics. This is done to boost the shoulder season and to help bring people to businesses during times that normally have lower visitation, as well as spread events out throughout the week instead of concentrating them on weekends. As an example, the Economic Impact Survey for Whiskey Warm-Up shows that direct spending in 2024 for that event was about $204,000, and Bigfoot Days was about $472,000. Sustainability efforts. Events and Visitor Services has partnered with the League of Women Voters to volunteer at events to assist with recycling and overall sustainability efforts. The League is putting together a report to highlight this work over the last year, and the department also received a grant for 2 water fill stations and trash and recycling bins for events. So based on the research conducted and the current status of events, a guiding philosophy could contain the following elements: prioritizing collaboration, a focus on events that showcase our unique community, celebrating local culture, arts and recreation, being good stewards of the environment, considering local priority for vendors and encouraging attendees of signature events to visit local businesses, providing a safe and positive experience for residents and visitors, reserving Bond Park for civic uses and support, assisting outside event organizers in producing successful events, minimizing adverse impacts on neighborhoods, businesses, and public services, the mission of the department, police support for security at public and private events, and non-police support for public and private events. Additional elements that could potentially be included are reducing the number of arts and crafts festivals in Bond Park and not producing new alcohol-centered events or reducing the number of current such events. And so now we will pull up the draft guiding philosophy. All right, so we started this draft specifically for the discussion to review here. And then as mentioned earlier, specific direction that we need is how you would like this incorporated into the operations of the Events and Visitor Services Department. If it's a policy that you want to adopt, we could have a really quick turnaround and bring this to you for the December 9th town board meeting. Or it could be a department level document. So I'll just read through this draft guiding philosophy for events. The town of Estes Park produces and supports events that showcase the unique community of Estes Park and support our local economy and nonprofits. Events are designed to celebrate local culture, arts, and recreation while providing a safe and positive experience for residents and visitors alike. Events and Visitor Services staff will prioritize collaboration at all stages of the event process: planning, execution, and evaluation, environmental sustainability, and work to mitigate any adverse impact of events on neighborhoods, businesses, and public services. And so then the remaining sections are just kind of a deeper dive into those elements that were in the previous slide. So prioritize collaboration. The Events and Visitor Services team works with both internal and external partners on event planning, execution, and evaluation. This collaboration helps ensure that adverse impacts are mitigated and that all stakeholders have an opportunity to engage in each stage of the process. Focus on events that showcase our unique community and celebrate local culture, arts, and recreation. The town's signature events are popular and appreciated by locals and visitors alike. These events should showcase the unique and diverse aspects of our community, from Bigfoot Days to the Rooftop Rodeo to Catch the Glow. Each signature event highlights a fun and unique aspect of Estes Park. Events are intended to celebrate our local culture, arts, and recreation. The town will prioritize local vendors when possible and will encourage all attendees at the town signature events to visit and patronize local businesses. Reserving Bond Park for civic uses and support. Bond Park should only be used for civic uses, publicly owned events, or events that support local nonprofits. Efforts should be made to ensure that Bond Park events are not repetitive or generic. Exercise good stewardship for the community. Our events should invite visitors to engage responsibly with our mountain community and balance celebration with stewardship. Events and Visitor Services staff will prioritize efforts to reduce waste and work with internal and external partners to manage traffic, parking, and transportation, as well as mitigate adverse impacts on neighborhoods, businesses, and overall public services. The town will not financially support new private events with either cash or in-kind considerations. Town financial resources will be focused on town signature events. Assist outside event organizers in producing successful events. Events and visitor services staff will help outside event organizers produce successful events by serving as a resource for planning, permitting, and execution, keeping all elements of the guiding philosophy in mind throughout the process. Prioritize public safety. Events and visitor services will work closely with the Estes Park Police Department to ensure that all attendees have a safe and positive event experience. The police department will always respond to public safety incidents, but they do not have the resources to provide continuous security at events. Event organizers that request this level of security for their events will be required to fund these resources. The overall safety and security of the town will not be compromised based on the individual needs of a specific event, And then again, those additional elements that could potentially be included: reducing the number of arts and crafts festivals in Bond Park and not producing new alcohol-centered events, or reducing the number of current such events. Happy to take any questions or thoughts.
Well, there were, and thanks for this, there were a lot more items on the things that might be considered on the prior slide than what you've got on this draft guiding philosophy. I thought there was like 20 or
They're all in here. So on the potential elements of the guiding philosophy, let's see, I can pull that back up. They're all woven into this.
Yeah, you don't have to go back
Okay.
to it. Okay. On the, or scroll down just a little.
Sure.
The reserving Bond Park for civic uses and support, or, well, whatever, publicly owned civic uses, local nonprofits. Are there other events right now that are using Bond Park? Are there private events that don't fit in these categories, and how many are there?
2 right now.
2. Which are, is like the duck race?
The wine festival.
Wine festival.
Yeah, the wine festival and the, I just lost it,
What-
Handmade in Colorado.
The what color?
Handmade in Colorado.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, there's not a ton of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I've got some thoughts. First of all, thank you for the very comprehensive report. It was really helpful to see that. And you mentioned something that it's a broader question, but you mentioned it, and I'm glad you did, because it was on my list of things that I wanted to talk about, is the how of implementing this philosophy. And you mentioned it, do we kind of go more into the ops side and have the events department, take on this direction from the board level? Or is it a policy that we adopt at the board level? And I'm curious if you have any information when you talk to those other communities managing it. I think I'd seen in the report that Telluride, somebody has like a committee of community members, maybe I'm thinking of Aspen, but and then you talked about the application process and the criteria in Telluride. But I'm curious from a process standpoint, if it were a board adopted policy, does that mean any new event would then come to the board for, I know we cover Bond Park, or if we were to say, okay, this is kind of the direction, great, this is the direction we want with these tweaks, and we send it to staff to adopt as their policy, what would we envision then being like, okay, every year, does it come back to this board to check in? And do they just kind of go by those general guidelines and use their best judgment? Can we just talk through that? I'm trying to think about the how of implementation.
Yeah, so the way management analyst Simpson and I have been discussing this is there's really a range of options that run between, you think of it between a policy approach and a master plan approach. A master plan approach, broader, it's a little more flexible. There are maybe policies that are implemented off of that broader approach, but it itself is not a regulatory document. So it gives staff general direction, something like what you would get at a study session, but it's not a hard and fast, this must happen in this way. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is policy. You could policize all of this, and it would have the effect of this is how we are doing things. There's not flexibility here unless it's written into the policy, and this is how we're going to approach each one of these aspects. Some of these would be easier to policize than others. The reservation of Bond Park for civic uses and support, really easy policy. Focusing on events that showcase our unique community and celebrate local culture, arts, and recreation. A lot more judgment in that. It's a lot more flexible. So one of the kind of in the middle places could be, we're going to adopt this as kind of the guiding philosophy, and we want to see it implemented through various policies, and maybe these are the priority areas that we want to see the policies implemented in. So that's really more of the master plan approach. This is the master plan, but each of the subsequent implementations of that are subject to board discretion, whether that's through a board policy on the use of Bond Park. We already have a policy on that. It would be amending that policy. Right now, any new event in Bond Park has to come from the board.
Right.
But it could also be like, well, we don't want a policy necessarily that the town board has to review every new private event in town. Maybe we only care about the ones down in Bond Park at that level, and the rest of it, the staff can kind of take this guiding philosophy and use it to make decisions.
That's the exact answer and info I was looking for, so thank you. And that's, I think the master plan approach is definitely where I would want to go. The idea of creating board level policies for so many of these things, or even, you know, a couple of the Bond Park policy that we already have, I think that makes sense. If we were to modify that to maybe include the civic uses, publicly owned events, supporting nonprofits, and maybe we have to discuss then grandfathering in those two, or how we would approach those two that don't fit into that mold. I'd be open to that, but I'd much rather have it be a board kind of directed master plan that then goes to staff for, okay, great, we can work within these parameters. And I'd honestly be interested in it to maybe coming before the board every 2 years when a new board is seated, so that there could be a touching base, you know, or I don't know if that would be a reasonable time frame, but I could see that as our society changes, as our community changes, you know, as some of these approaches maybe change, we might want to touch base on that. So, yeah, that one of my questions, what kind of teeth do we have, and do we want to review that on an annual basis? The other thing I wanted to mention was your question about alcohol centric. I think it would be really interesting to maybe not, I don't want to back ourselves too far in a corner and say we'll never adopt another alcohol-centric event again, because I think we just never, you know, maybe we have another iteration of Pumpkins and Pilsners that comes, it's a fundraiser for our community or something like that. However, I do think the way that the like alcohol industry is trending anyway, it would be a great idea to say maybe we want to steer a little bit from bringing on more alcohol events. Maybe we're not axing them out completely, but that would just be direction for Rob and his team on, okay, we're more interested in alcohol-free or not alcohol-driven events. That is definitely of interest for me, because I also think it would fit with, we're watching generations behind my generation. They're not drinking as much. They're looking for the non-alcoholic stuff, and I think that's just a smart economic move for us as well. But otherwise, what you've laid out looks really compelling to me. What I really appreciate is that it pulls in staff recommendations and pulls in some community input. So I think for us, my perspective on this is great. I hear what the community is saying. You've done a wonderful job of summarizing it. And I think the way that it's structured is compelling to me as that master plan approach.
Thank you.
Trustee Hazelton nailed a lot of things that I was going to bring up. And I think that I appreciate the information. A lot of the information that you brought forward reflects a lot of input that I've heard over the years about what the community wants to have some say in how Estes Park is identified as what's important to our community. And I think the type of events that we have strongly reflect what type of community we have. I heard a very strong sentiment from the community in the information you provided, is that we don't want to have alcohol in the name of events, that we focus activities around. And I'm not sure why it's, could you scroll down on this? Because I can't move it on my screen. Options for, additional elements that could potentially be included. I'm not sure why those are at the bottom of the list. I think that we need to take a hard look at any event that has any alcoholic reference in the title. I think that it could be That could be a part of the event, but to title it that way really gives a strong nod of support in that, not just financially, but also philosophically or as a value that we support. And I don't think the community does strongly support that. We see that here. So I would like to see moving away from so many events that focus on alcohol, or at least restructure the name or how they're promoted. So it's not come to Estes Park to drink whiskey or wine or whatever that is. I think that will be listening to and responding to the community in a really constructive way. And it also might have a benefit that we attract more families. Boy, that had a bunch of things. I think the number one thing for me in all of this is that we locally focused nonprofit or civic events will create a higher community value. And I think that for me is important. I think events have to create a higher value for our community. It has to encourage stronger resident participation. I don't know how many times you've heard people say, I hear it all the time, well, I never go downtown. I live here. I never go downtown. I've heard some people in this room say that. I get it. It's a different perspective when you're running a business and benefiting from that, but we want residents to have the opportunity, not just in theory. We don't want to just say we want to make it friendlier for our community and support them, but what Kirby said about what's the action plan here? There are a lot of things that you captured in the description of the potential policy that say encouraging participants to integrate with the business community. What does that mean? Because saying it in the plan doesn't mean anything. We have to have steps to do that. However, I don't want to be involved in the policies. I think as a board, we want to give you the direction of what the community wants and let you execute that. It sounds like you have a really good grasp of what that looks like. I don't know if a separate advisory panel is necessary. I think it is a good idea to bring new events to this board to, as elected representatives, weigh in on what the community might need. And I agree that at least every 2 years, we need to take a look at that. And if we decide tonight, per se, there are 2 events that we don't want to have next year, well, that's how it goes. And I think that that's a really defensible position because we don't have contractual obligations. If an event has been here for, say, 10 years, and it's been really successful, and the promoters really like that, well, that's good, but our community might have changed. So I think that it is a reality that we review events and they may change on a regular cycle. I have a lot more thoughts on this. I'm going to be very interested to see how it shakes out. I think you are going the right direction to reflect what the community wants, but I really don't like seeing elements that could potentially be included down as low as they are when the community has spoken much more specifically that those events need to be addressed now.
Okay.
Thank you for your hard work on
Sure,
this.
thank you.
I've got some questions and some thoughts. Let me start with questions. I'm curious as to the financial aspects of all these events and, how that works for the town versus the efforts that we have to put in to maintain these events, whether we're appropriately capturing, a recoupment of costs, and I know that, and on a related vote, also, what's the capacity of the staff in terms of managing these things?
Well, as far as you talked about, are you talking about profit from these events into the town or
just-
economic impact?
Yeah, I presume they're not really profitable if you really count everything together. That's not the point of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's all about getting people to the community
Yeah.
and that impact it has on the community. And that's what we're striving for. So when we put on an event, if we can break even, that's great.
That's fabulous,
You know,
right?
and
We don't
bring in,
care beyond that, yeah.
because there's quite a few events. We don't spend a lot of money on our signature events. So, you look at Bigfoot Days, it's probably about $35,000, but it has a huge impact and brings in thousands of people.
Yeah.
And that's a new event that we set up, as far as an early spring event and a shoulder season type of an event. But, you know, each event is so different, and it's hard to lump it all together and say, this is what it looks like.
But again, capacity to do
Right.
these events, you know, do we have the capacity to do more if we wanted? Are we stretched to the limit?
We're at capacity right now.
You're at capacity right
Right.
now.
We touch about 200 events, and we have 3 event coordinators
Right.
and 5 operations staff. So
Yeah,
we do a
that's
lot
not
of
a big
work.
staff for
And
that
that's
much.
pretty condensed into the summertime too. So
Right.
it's,
And there's a focus here kind of on Bond Park, and I know you have lots of events out at the event center too. You know, I don't think most residents are as aware of those because they're kind of segregated out there. Everything in Bond Park, you know, you can't get through town without seeing them.
right.
And so they're much more available. And I do think from a governing body perspective, we are really interested in what's happening in Bond Park. Probably not as interested in what's happening out at the event center. And I guess we need to trust on that financial side that you're comfortable with how that's working out. Because, you know, I think if you felt that there was a big shortfall that needed to be addressed somehow, you know, that's either going to be taken care of by fees to the participants or by, you know, allocation of resources by the town board. So, you know, in that regard, I very much understand that the real purpose is to get people to town. I get that. And so that's why I asked the capacity thing too, because, you know, you hear this thing about winter-centric events. Well, you know, that'll require more capacity in order to be able to produce those. You know, it's not as busy a time when they're actually here, but you still got to plan for it in advance. So it takes a lot to do that. You know, I remember also some old events that, I remember when there used to be a shootout down on Bond Park. I don't know if you remember that. I don't know if that was discontinued for political reasons or what, but
It was not political reasons. My understanding, it was discontinued for safety reasons, and I think there's a longer story to that
Okay.
we may look to get some historical veracity behind.
and then we had a criterium go through town at one point. Now that, you know, I don't think benefited the town quite the same way. I actually liked the shootout. I just thought it gave you a Western vibe here. You know, we have things like Cowboy Bride at Bond Park, which are kind of not in here. And I don't know, I'm very concerned with what happens at Bond Park, not very concerned about what you're doing at the event center, unless you have a big stoner convention. I'd be probably concerned about that. But it's, I am a little concerned about some of the additional elements about, like reduce the number of arts and crafts festivals. Well, I think there might be a way to focus arts and crafts festivals differently so that they really are different. And, you know, if we're trying to get people to town, you know, even if they're duplicative, they still get people to town. So I'm not sure that I necessarily want to reduce them. I do share the view of Trustee Eichel about alcohol-centric events, and particularly with the name. So it's kind of an image thing from that standpoint. So, and frankly, I'm not sure I would distinguish between, so 2 of these are private events, and if we adopted that last bullet point, we would eliminate those presumably. But if they're successful events too, I'm not sure we want to get rid of them either. So I don't really want to grow the alcohol area, but I think there is a place for it nonetheless, as long as they're being successful. And I heard that, you know, there doesn't seem to be a lot of police problems with it. So I would not want to get rid of any successful events, even if they're alcohol centered at this point. And, you know, maybe we can reinstitute the shootout on alcohol.
I'll look into it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I got a few things. One, and just to kind of put in perspective, and this always surprised me, but the Visit Estes Park Visitor Survey, we talk a lot about events and how much we spend, and Visit Estes Park spends a lot on events. But when they actually did their visitor survey, the number of people who come to Estes Park for events is actually pretty small. I think it
That's
was
correct.
in the teens. It was like 17% or something.
I
you
don't
remember?
remember the number, but.
It was
with most-
surprisingly
yeah.
low. So in some ways, you know, what we do to get people to enjoy Estes Park and come here, the events are kind of they're a satisfier. They're something that adds to when somebody's here. But the number of people it actually brings to town for an event is actually a lot smaller than I think we realize. Couple comments. I don't have a problem with alcohol events. I'm sorry, I don't. I mean, I think as long as we keep the sheriff's, or the sheriff, sorry. You can't run for sheriff. We want you here. Police chief said that we haven't had really problems with events. I mean, obviously we have alcohol problems, probably more with the bars in town than with the events. But that doesn't bother me. Again, and then the arts and crafts, I don't want to limit them, but the quality, there's a couple of them, you know, when they're selling Chinese-made sunglasses, I have a hard time with that. But I also don't want to cut it off. If we had somebody come in with something new, say a sculpture exhibit, a bronze exhibit, show, something different that we could show and it would attract people or people would enjoy. I think it almost has to be on a case-by-case basis of what it is. I think the quality versus the quantity. I hate to see things that are just selling junk for selling junk's sake, but if we had something came in, the juried art ones I think are really nice. And we have some good stuff in here, and I come down to them. We enjoy coming to them even after as long as we've been here. I think that's. There was a comment in there about not financially participating with any private events. Again, I think that needs to be on a case-by-case basis. And I think we're a little too black and white there because, you know, as Rob knows, there are events that we sponsor. There are events where we just are basically the landlord and we rent out the space. But then there are events that we partner on. And if there's an event going on that's a private entity and it meets some of these other criteria and they would like to partner with us and we could help with some of the marketing and stuff, and it fits the other criteria, just to have, because it was a private promoter came in and did it, for us to just say no, I'm not sure I'd want to have that cut and dried. The other is, what if the private event means the town's not doing it, right? Well, what if the West Elkhorn decides to do something and the businesses all get together? Does that mean that we won't help them out? Because it's a private event? Again, we need to look at what's that partnership and what that works. So I think some case-by-case things need to be there. There are a couple things that I think are holes here that are missing. And one you probably never thought about, but we saw it come up this spring, and it probably just needs to be clause if we write a policy, so we have something, is political and free speech events. What is our policy there? We tripped over that a little bit this last year with an event that happened. It was going to be in Bond Park. They came to get a permit. They said they couldn't do it. They had to get 6 weeks notice or something. They had to stay on the sidewalk. Dan's not here, but I think we were treading on some thin ice when we were telling people you can't have a political protest in Bond Park. They may have a permit. I just think it's something we need to have in there. I don't know how it'd be addressed, but I think just a clause to address free speech issues and free speech events that are covered under those kind of constitutional issues. Yeah. Oh, he is. Oh, he is. Oh, okay. Okay. Well, yeah, Dan can weigh in from wherever he is. But maybe he could weigh in on that part. I think it's just a part that's missing. The other two things that I saw were missing is one, and Bill kind of alluded to it, is road events. And I had a great amount of experience with that at the county. Very frustrating. Marathons, half marathons, bike races, did inline skating races, all those kind of things that have a real impact on the community. Benefits are kind of small, but they do attract people. The impact on the police if they start wanting to close down roads, close down areas where people can't get access, having too many of them all at the same time. And I think having some type of permitting and things, I think we do have some permits there. But again, what's our philosophy on that? That we don't have a marathon every weekend and it's trying to close down the roads and those kind of events that affect other parts of town policy. And the other one, and this could be a little more discussion is, and again, this is from experience, is if we had a major event on private property that may not fit the zoning or something, the impacts on the computer, where'd that come from? On the community can be huge. And it may be something that we may not want to have or may be difficult to have. And I'll give you the example of why the county started doing special events permits. We had a big music festival. I don't remember what they called it, but it was up in Red Feather where it was huge. I mean, there were thousands of people came in. It was basically a drug fest where they came in, put up stages. There were actually what we would call a food truck. Well, there were drug trucks that were selling illicit drugs. There was a lot of problems. They brought in tons of porta potties. And when the county tried to shut it down before it happened, we couldn't because they hadn't done anything yet. And the thing went on. There were a lot of arrests. It was a problem. They trashed this piece of property. And the county came back and we decided to have permits and require permits for those type of events on private land. And then we could get, if they tried to do something like that and they hadn't gotten a permit, then you can get a restraining order and stop it from happening before it happens. But otherwise, the problem we had with these kind of things is it had happened over a weekend, totally destroy the property. The neighbors have this terrible time, noise, they can't do it, they complain. You go up there, you got thousands of people to deal with. They're all gone Monday morning. The promoters go on and they do it somewhere else in the state. They do something else and the damage is done. But by having some type of a permit system, we were able to say, all right, no, you can't even start it because you don't have a permit. And we could get a restraining order in a case like that. So it's a little bit different than what you're looking at here, but if we're gonna address special events, we need to look at special events and how they impact the community. And they aren't just things the town does, it's not just Bond Park. You know, I could see, you know, the Stanley could have some kind of huge festival up there. What do we have to control the impacts that would have on the community, which could have just the same kind of impacts as something in Bond Park.
Right.
But we really, I'm not sure now we have a really good way to address that. That's not one we're involved in. And I think that was all my notes that I had.
Thank you.
Do we want Dan to speak first?
Sure, I can weigh in. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
I don't have too much to say in response to Trustee Lancaster's remarks. First of all, I just wanted to make sure you all know I'm available. I'm here. I'm attending remotely. So if you have questions that come up, I don't plan to be presenting anything to you all tonight, but I'm here. I'm not up to speed on the specific event that Trustee Lancaster referenced, but I just wanted to echo the concerns about making sure we're paying attention to the First Amendment and procedural issues as we go through this. I haven't heard anything that gives me pause, but it's always important to be thinking through those aspects as well.
I can weigh in on this specific issue because I remember it and I just pulled up the email thread. There was a miscommunication from an employee to an event organizer. We did correct that. There is not a permit needed to hold political demonstrations in Bond Park. If you're having an event, you need a permit. But if you're just organizing a protest, it's open. So it's, we have been through that. We went through and connected with the events team and the PD staff. And it's basically the regulations are you can't obstruct a pathway. So you actually can't stand on you can stand on the sidewalks, but you can't stand on the sidewalks such that people cannot pass by. So we did rectify that, but I agree it might be good to have that enshrined somewhere.
Sentences in there.
Yeah.
Some good points have been made. I'm more focused on the residents, of course, traffic issues and things like that versus downtown Bond Park and out at the event center. I was wondering, Director Hinkle, if you could address, is there room enough out in the, meaning by date, not space, to have, I mean, it seems like the merchants want it downtown, but yet they don't want people downtown. That's always been a struggle. What should we have at Bond Park? What should we not have at Bond Park? But in order to really look at that, is there capability of pulling some of these? Maybe we don't want more of the alcohol-focused events to be downtown. Maybe they should be a little outside of town, or maybe the art festival. I mean, we haven't talked about that, and I'm just wondering if that also needs to be in the conversation. You know, maybe the arts and crafts things need to be away from town, so that way the merchants don't feel like they're getting, competing. I don't know. But first of all, is there space in the calendar year for any of those type of events that we may not feel are what we want for our image of downtown to host available out there?
There is space at the event center, but there may not be the same dates that, for instance, these art markets, the vendors travel around the state or the actual region to go to these festivals. And so these are very specific dates, and it's the same date every year.
Okay.
Those dates
That's
may
true.
not be available depending upon what we've got going on out at the
Okay.
event center.
Well, I just didn't know if that was the thought process in this, deciding, okay, are we okay with alcohol events, but do we not want them right downtown? Is that more of an issue with traffic and things like that? So I don't know if that's a piece that we're missing or if it's not that important.
Right.
So I wanted to bring that up. I agree, the family friendly events, definitely, I think we need to push, and I agree that it is, more mocktail type, is coming in more than going to the alcohol event. So maybe that would be something that, I don't know if events come to us and say, an event planner comes and says, well, I would like to do an event in Estes, it's going to be alcohol based. I don't know if we really want that event, if we can say, that's fine, but you also need, would you be able to offer non-alcoholic and then also the name in the event? I don't think it should be the trustees doing that. I think the staff managing that. But those are just some suggestions maybe I hate to not have an event come because they're going to have alcohol, but if they are aware that maybe they could offer two type of options, that would be more agreeable to have Estes host them. I do agree with the master plan approach. And I just lost my computer, just went away. But I agree the number of arts and crafts festivals need to be looked at. And then, of course, the alcohol centered. I'm not saying not to have any more, but I would like for that to be a case by case, and maybe, you know, like I said, a recommendation to the event host that, if, maybe it's a criteria, if you are gonna serve alcohol, you also need to serve a non-alcoholic beverage. Cause how can you be a family event and only have alcohol? It's not, right? So if our community wants family-friendly events, the image of Estes to be more cultural and family-friendly, I don't see how we can continue to bring in more alcohol-only centered events. That's my concern. Then, and the reason I bring up events going maybe over to the event center is the other that came out of that poll was the congestion, the traffic. I don't know if we can manage. We have a great complex out there, and if there's something we could move over there that would accommodate the date and make sense, maybe I would like for staff to be looking at that, and maybe they already have. I don't know. But I think those are my thoughts.
I know we're already past time. We've got at least 3 of us who still want to make a couple comments, so let's keep it rolling.
I need a clarification from Dan. Hey, Dan, what's the difference between an organized political protest and an organized religious event? So if somebody wanted to have the Hare Krishnas have their event in Baum Park, wouldn't they be the same as an organized protest?
Trustee Sinek, that's a great question that would require a very long answer and a good deal of research. They're protected by different aspects of the First Amendment, both very highly protected. There are different protections for political events, especially ones that are spontaneous in nature, based on current events as they unfold, which would be usually different from religious type events. There's also establishment clause issues as part of the First Amendment. So that's something that doesn't come into play as much with political events, but the government cannot respect the establishment of religion. And what that means has been changing under the Supreme Court jurisprudence that keeps coming out, but it's still an element of the First Amendment. So that's just sort of the outline of a much longer answer that would take, well, it would be a lot more involved to really get into that.
Okay, I actually think it's really important, honestly, because, you know, when I'm driving through and there's a political press on either side, right, it actually ruins my day in Bond Park. It does. As a visitor, I don't want to see 100 people out there protesting. I don't care if it's protesting slime. It doesn't matter to me. So if we're going to be not limiting political protests, then we shouldn't be limiting religious organized events either. If somebody wants to get in there and sing, you know, Kumbaya with 1,000 people, then it should have the same merit, as far as I'm concerned, as the political protests. So I think that's something we're going to really have to look at. Alcohol-wise, I don't really have a huge preference. I mean, I do think that the community has said that they don't want to like more centered on alcohol. I think that we are adults, and so to say no alcohol is kind of silly. But centered around it, the community has spoken that I don't think we probably need any more centered around it. But anyway, I actually very strongly feel that if we're not going to limit political, we shouldn't be limiting religious either. No matter what religion it is, which it actually doesn't matter which political it is. So that's how I thought.
And folks, grab your dinners if you want to. I mean, we have no public here anyways, though we probably have thousands online, but feel free to eat along the way.
Mayor, I overlooked, Suzanne, one of the important parts of my comments was that we have to be able to quantify what success is. And I heard a couple of comments that reminded me that's important to me. If it's going to come back to us, how do we know if it's successful? Because I don't think that success is numbers. I don't think that bringing people to town, attendance is not success. And then Frank said it really well, quantity versus quality. And we want quality. We want something that people can enjoy, appreciate, and look forward to, and not just abhor. There's that event again with 1 billion people, with things that compete with that. I mean, there's so many different things that happen. But I think that if we really push for quality, and not measure success by how many cars, what's the traffic count on the highway, that is not success for me. That's failure to me in many circumstances. The more cars we have and congestion, let's focus on quality. So I would like to see as part of this and part of the direction from the board being, help us measure success. How are we going to quantify that? And that might be an evaluation of a quick get-together after an event on Monday morning to say, hey, how'd it go? What's your perspective, PD, events, administration, whatever the different entities are, an event organizer, it could be a Zoom meeting, right? We can have everybody involved. And I think we need to keep an eye on sales tax remittance and are the events following the rules? And that's all part of measuring, was that a successful event? Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment. There were some things in here about how businesses and how it affect business. I think we just need to, again, realize when we talk about business Estes Park, we tend to start thinking about downtown. But there are a lot of businesses that might answer that have nothing to do with it. You know, if it was the manager at Ace Hardware, they probably don't care what happens with special events. It doesn't increase it or the rental store. So really what we're talking about, what's the impact of somebody like Colorado Homestead that's selling arts and crafts and how they compete with that. But, you know, they're not selling paint and stuff that would compete with other businesses.
So just for your information, the business respondents, we did ask the question about their location. And so 30% of them were downtown, 39% were not downtown but in town limits, and then 24% were just in the overall Estes Valley area. Bless you.
I don't know whether we're hitting your guidance request that we're back toward the beginning of your presentation. You probably have a sense of whether we've been answering that along the way. I think we've hit some of them at least. Alcohol, no increased big safety statistics is what we heard, but we also heard the survey, which still was only 198 out of the whole population, saying less of those. But personally don't think we have a major problem with that and wouldn't take any radical step against it. The private event funding, it echoes so much with me right now because of the whole parade Scottish Fest thing, because we've all gotten a tremendous amount of pushback in regard to that, and I have learned the issue well and have answered it a little bit, but yeah, I certainly think we have to be cautious on private event funding, whether in kind, which we do a huge amount still for the Scott Fest, even though we withdrew that cash outlay for the parade, which is creating great angst with some people, even though I think the event has had some attendance challenges for several years regardless of parade status. Arts and crafts, yeah, we were driving by the last one. We actually stopped at it, and my wife and I were commenting on how that's a filler event when we don't have another festival that fits into that slot. So it's pretty obvious to a lot of people, I think. One thing that I don't think anybody noted was the winter events, that both the merchants and the residents were saying we want more. And of course, we hear the other side of that, but I do think the preponderance of the statistics you saw there makes a good point that there is probably more who are asking for that. When I first moved into town 22 years ago and all my time at the hospital, everybody was saying we got to get a year-round economy here, even if we really have to support that strong summer like Jamie Palmisano at Brownfields advocates so highly. We can't neglect that summer, but we have to keep moving still on those shoulder events and creating that year-round economy. And that's what I heard from the survey. Those were my comments. I think, what else do you need from us?
I think we got it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you. Happy
Mayor,
Thanksgiving, everyone.
we're going to endeavor to bring back a draft policy for your consideration at December, recognizing that it may get pushed again to
Sure.
January with more feedback. But I think bringing back something that's concrete that you can react to and say, we're not ready to approve this now if you're not, and kick it to the first meeting in January is a good approach on this one because it's so multifaceted.
Yeah, it is, although there was some good consensus there. Okay.
And I definitely heard master plan approach, so that's how we'll bring it forward.
Do you folks want to just keep rolling, albeit with dinner? Let's do that. So let's go ahead and grab it. We'll just take a 2-minute pause to grab our stuff. And then Travis can take us into town focus groups. In fact, let's just go ahead with it. IT, keep it rolling. He's opening it up. You talk even while we move a little bit.
Excellent. So I am here tonight to talk about town focus groups. It's an approach that we have been asked to explore from the town board. Tonight is the very early part of this conversation. It's got an overview of what we are thinking about when we're thinking about ad hoc focus groups to make sure that that trues up with what the town board is thinking of. We've established a list of what we think the critical elements of establishing some sort of policy. This would likely be an amendment to Policy 102, which is how the board establishes committees, how you participate on committees. That policy needs to be updated with the sunsetting of TAB. So that would be the endpoint if the board does in fact want to pursue ad hoc focus groups. So tonight we'll talk about how we got to this point. We'll go over the board direction that we're asking for, and then we'll go through each of these items in the ad hoc focus groups, what they are, how they might be established, what an appointment process might look like, how you would assemble them, whether or not there's town board representation on those bodies, bylaws and charters, how are we going to approach how these groups are operating, how they're structured, and then whether or not we want these groups to be facilitated. So how we got here, very simple. On July 22nd of this year, the town board voted to sunset the Transportation Advisory Board. That was our last remaining advisory board, so now the town no longer has advisory boards. During that discussion, the board expressed interest in exploring other possibilities, other ways to gather feedback from residents that maybe are happening on a project by project basis or an initiative by initiative basis and are not necessarily standing groups that sometimes take on a life of their own or find other priorities. Really focus groups where a resident might be able to anticipate a very defined time commitment and not maybe a years long time commitment. So the town board asked for a study session, and what we're here tonight to ask the town board is, one, first and foremost, do you want to consider through a policy amendment the use of ad hoc focus groups for projects of significant community interest, realizing that there's a lot of terms in that bullet that need definition. What would trigger the creation of a focus group? What should that appointment process look like? Should each of these groups have a board liaison like our prior advisory boards had? Should each of the groups have a standard charter, or should they each be allowed to develop their own? And should those focus groups be facilitated by an outside party versus how we've handled these types of bodies in the past, where they're sort of facilitated by themselves or a chair and a vice chair or a town staff member? So taking each of those one-on-one, the town staff, me in front of you here tonight, is saying that my conceptualization of an ad hoc focus group is an advisory board that's appointed by the town board for a specific purpose or a project and for a limited duration. Typically that duration would be the completion of the project or the completion of the task that they're focused on. Ad hoc just means that they're being made, they're not permanent, they're not continuing, they're happening for a very specific purpose and then they go away. So the first thing we think about when we're talking about the creation of these types of bodies is, okay, well what creates it? How is it established? What triggers it? My takeaway is that any of these groups would have to be authorized by the full town board. They would be advising the town board. The board would be asking for their feedback. It would need a majority of the board to be created. Triggers for consideration of the creation of those, we talked about projects of significant community interest. How is that determined? Who is making that determination? I've listed a number of items here. The mayor or trustees could initiate a discussion of it at the town board level. Staff could bring it forward as we're talking about projects, saying we think this really could use or benefit from an ad hoc focus group. We could set a dollar threshold. Any project over $1 million requires an ad hoc focus group. There's complications with each one of those, or there may be something that we're not considering. Certainly the simplest of those is just to say the mayor, the trustees, any trustee or staff can bring forward this for consideration. Appointment process. So if we've decided that we want ad hoc focus groups and we've decided that we are going to establish them in a particular way, how are we going to constitute those groups? Lots of different ways, from a more traditional application process to a more innovative and newer approach that's been utilized in Fort Collins recently, where you do a randomized selection of community members. You send them an invitation. Hey, we want your opinion on this. Would you be willing to serve for this purpose, for this time duration, and let us know what you think. The city of Fort Collins recently did this for the Hughes Stadium project. They called it a civic assembly. It was a fascinating example in citizen participation and engagement in the development of public policy. You can find, there's news articles on it. Fort Collins has a ton of promotional material about it. It was a really interesting approach. That is something, not the full bore approach, but if we wanted to pursue a random, like we just want the average citizen on the street, we want their feedback on this, that might be an approach we could use. We do a version of this through the community survey, so technically I think it would be possible for us. The downside would be you wouldn't necessarily get the specific stakeholders that you're looking to get. I will say that a mix of these approaches could also be used. You could say that the town board will decide at the establishment of an ad hoc focus group what the appointment process will be, choosing from this list. You could choose to appoint specific stakeholders. If there's a project and it's going to impact a very narrow section of town, you could say, well, we want these people involved in this process. Or you could take a broader approach and say, we want to create a pre-approved applicant list. If you're interested in providing feedback to the town on anything, apply, we'll maintain a list, and when something comes up, we'll draw from that list to fill ad hoc focus groups. If an application process is used, we would also need to discuss, is the interview process going to be like we've traditionally done it, where it's a subset of the board, or do we want to do a broader interview process where we're having a special session and the full board is interviewing each of these individuals? Town board representation. They may or may not require a town board liaison like the advisory boards do. In the absence of a liaison, either a representative of the focus group, staff, or a facilitator, if we choose to use one, could provide the board with periodic updates of the committee's activities. This is really a town board preference. If you move forward with the creation of these groups, how do you want these groups to stay in touch with you? Bylaws or a charter. Each of these focus groups could take ownership and build their own set of bylaws or a charter. Could say, here's what we're doing, here's the task that's assigned to us, here's how we're going to approach this. There are some things that we would need in each one, some basic limitations like adhering to the public meetings law, open meetings law, things of that nature, but there is some flexibility in how groups could assemble themselves. The advantages, they have maybe some more ownership of that structure. The disadvantages is between groups you get varying degrees of formality and informality. So there are advantages and disadvantages there. The development of bylaws and charters likely to be time consuming, and it could lead to those differential processes across groups and create some challenges versus if, hey, you get one, fill in the blanks, when it's established, the board approves the charter, and that's the constitution for that group. The last item I'd like to talk about is facilitation. These groups could be facilitated by a third party. That may be beneficial as it allows the members of the group to focus on the issue at hand and less on managing group dynamics. It could be facilitated by staff. It could be facilitated by the chair or vice chair, or you could just not have facilitation, which is how we approach our advisory boards. Typically, the brunt of that load fell on the chair and vice chair to manage the meeting, and that can have varying degrees of success. So from staff standpoint, we do think that facilitation would be beneficial for these. I think we would start with asking restorative justice whether or not they would be interested in partnering with us on this. They may or may not be on the nonprofit arm, and if they're not, there would likely be some sort of cost associated with hiring a facilitator to do this work. There are a number of other approaches you could use to develop facilitation skills and abilities. The Larimer County has an internal facilitation group within the county of employees that are able and willing to facilitate outside of their areas. So they're not tied into the outcome of the approach, but they're also, it's a cost-effective way to both develop staff and to get good facilitation done. So lots of approaches to this. The key question is the town board interested in these being facilitated, or do you want to delegate that meeting management to the chair or vice chair or staff? So that's it in a nutshell. It all starts with that first bullet. Is this something that the board still wants to consider? And if so, the remaining bullets fall from that. Gathering feedback from you all will be helpful. If you do want to proceed forward, the next step would be staff developing a proposed approach based on the feedback we gathered from you tonight, probably bringing that back to one more study session, and then developing that final document that would move forward.
Thanks for the presentation. I would like to see us use ad hocs at appropriate times. I think the trustees can, along with staff, make that recommendation that that particular thing that's coming up would benefit from an ad hoc focus group. The appointment process, I really like the flexibility in, we would want the expertise to be there. And so I would like maybe the approach that Fort Collins used, you know, seeking out individuals and maybe having, if we find, you know, a citizen come forward that could contribute to that conversation, we could use that too. So kind of a two-prong approach, but not just open to whoever, because then we may not be seeking the expertise that we're needing to have for that group. The liaison, I think that's important because I don't foresee this being used a lot. And when we do have an ad hoc, I think it's going to be obviously an important decision or processes going on. So I think a liaison would be helpful in that. I think the charter, let's see, go back to that screen. I can't remember what my, the bylaws. I would like to just have a standard fill in the blank type thing. Okay, and then the last one was, I think it would be really helpful to have it facilitated. I think you get a lot done. You don't, you know, I think it can avoid conflicts of personalities, things like that, that perhaps we've ran into in the past in different groups. So I would like to see us some type of facilitation approach, whether that's even somebody that has that expertise, retired third party that doesn't have any connection, could even help facilitate it. But that would be my answers to those questions.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to Trustee Youngland. I think the mayor, trustees, or staff, any could raise the idea. I don't think there should be a mechanical trigger that kicks it off, like a dollar amount or something. But any of us could bring it forth and then determine as a group to go forth with that establishment. I like the facilitation idea. I like the standard bylaws, simplicity there. And I think, yeah, if these are going to be relatively rare, a liaison's a good idea. You know, a listener who is that conduit back to the board, but who is a listener. that it's important that the board member on that doesn't dominate that committee, but allows the citizenry to take it forth. The appointment process probably varies by the nature of what the project is. That huge community issue with the Hughes Stadium area, yeah, I can see the value of that randomness, but I don't think you'd always have to use that. There would be some topics that we could have a smaller approach to that rather than a full community randomness. And that's pretty much it.
Kind of ditto. I like the idea. I think it could be triggered or at least suggested by staff or by town board, excuse me. Appointment process, I think that could be flexible on who's appointed, depending on, as we said here, if it's a neighborhood issue, maybe it's just from that neighborhood. It's of a specific topic issue. If we're talking about changing of plumbing codes, maybe we need to have a certain amount of expertise. So we might want to give, that would be a different group than if we wanted somebody with expertise, not have somebody that doesn't know what they're talking about there. So that could do that. I do think there ought to be a board liaison. We're not going to use too many of those. And certainly a staff support person. I think a standard charter makes sense. Because they're ad hoc and they don't go that long, we'd have to spend so much time developing a charter and doing people, we'd waste more time on that probably than the whole focus group. And I do think it should be facilitated, whether it's internally or with a third party, and not left it up to the chair for the reasons that were stated here, so.
I'm gonna be I think actually, I'm surprised by this, and I'm like, I don't know, I was not expecting to feel this way until when I came in here. And I didn't feel this way until just now, but I think I'm a dissenter on this. I would rather see us work with larger segments of our community to address significant projects or projects of significant community interest, similar to how we've been approaching the development code update. The way that RJ has worked with the library and some other and ComDev and the agency, with everybody who's been involved in that rewrite, to me is a much more compelling approach for big community issues, because it tackles it from the lens of not whose voice is the loudest or who, recruits people to join them in, on a committee like this, or who gets riled up about a certain project or whatever, but it's much more about approaching it from the lens of how can we address these huge issues, how can we solve these wicked problems. And I think that having ad hoc focus groups, I don't want to sound like I'm assuming negative, that there would be a negative outcome, but I fear that it would become a campaign if somebody's really riled up about a certain transportation project or really riled up about international building codes or something like that, and then all of a sudden it becomes an initiative just to push that agenda versus actually coming to the town board and to the decision makers and to staff with, hey, I still feel strongly about this, but I'm able to kind of approach the aisle on this direction, and somebody from the other side, same thing, that we're able to more approach the center of the Venn diagram. What I fear too is the amount of staff time and administrative energy and time that we'll spend on these, that I don't know how representative of our community they will be. I hope that they would be representative of our community, but for the Transportation Advisory Board, we heard up until a certain point that it wasn't representative of our community, and then a lot of things changed, and then all of a sudden it wasn't functional anymore, and other people felt like it wasn't representative of the community, and I'm fearful that this would become more campaigny. So I'm actually less interested in the use of ad hoc focus groups and more interested in a longer term engagement with restorative justice and the library for things like community conversations that bring to us a larger sample, representative sample, and from the structure of how can we solve these wicked problems together, or how can we come to a community collective. Now that still requires people to show up to those kinds of events, but for something like the development code, there hasn't, there's been a lot of people showing up. So that's, I know I'm going to be in the minority here, but that would be my perspective, is I actually would rather move away from focus groups and move more into a model that attracts a larger segment and actually gives us content that represents those various aspects versus, a group of 7 who may be representative of different segments of their community, but yeah.
I don't disagree. I think, but there are maybe some things that we would want a focus group on, like we're talking about plumbing, whatever. I don't think we need the whole community on that kind of thing, but they have to be few and far between. I think kind of a call for we would like people interested in serving on this ad hoc, through paper, something like that they can apply. Not make it too formal, but the fact that somebody may have some expertise that we use in the community, I think would be a good thing. I actually don't think you need to have a town board liaison if you have restorative justice there. Because I do think sometimes people aren't as open when the town board is there. And sometimes they're actually maybe too open when the town board is there. But it focuses on what they want to tell the town board versus discussing it as a group. And restorative justice giving us a kind of the summary, which I think is more helpful than hearing the one voice that's talking to you at that meeting kind of thing. So I actually, probably the only one here that says I don't think you need a town board liaison, only because I think it works out better sometimes without us there. And that's about it.
Mayor Pro Tem Sinek changed my mind on the liaison.
I agree with Kirby that this has the opportunity, potential, and probably likely that small groups can be used as a political action group, depending on who joins and who's involved. So the selection process will make or break that deal. I think there is some value to having experts, but I think there's greater value to having people who aren't experts, who just live here and who just are residents here. And so I think that for that reason, this ad hoc committee could work, but I would lean away from using it as our primary source of information, a group of less than 10 people to decide major issues or provide the input. I do think it needs to be broader. And if it's going to cost us $10,000 to put on an ad hoc group, well, let's have an election and let's listen to what the people say, because we want to know what the community believes. And how hard is it to get a representative? I mean, each of us, what do each of us represent? I think the broader voice of the community will be more beneficial for larger issues, which is ironic hearing that here, because I feel like the community voice has not been heard on some things. So the challenge for me is, how do we capture that? How do we have an effective way to do that? So I don't know that an ad hoc committee of a small group of people is going to provide the best representation for very important issues. I agree with Kirby in taking a broader collection of information. I don't know how successful what you referred to, Kirby, with the development code. I don't know what the attendance was of those. I don't know how many voices were heard. Can you comment on that?
There will be, I could give you a number and it would be wrong. There will be a report forthcoming from that group that we are hoping to share along with the engagement summary from our consultants at the January 27th study session, I believe, is when that's scheduled.
Okay.
So that will include both an overview of the community conversation approach that Restorative Justice and the library undertook, as well as the engagement efforts that the consultant undertook. They were linked in a lot of areas, but there are also distinct results.
I think one of the concerns that I have about small groups, like when we go to get information from the community, we're going to have 6 tables and you bring your concerns up in your group of 5 people. Well, I want to know what other people think. I want to know what the community thinks. I want the raw data. I don't want it to be interpreted for me by someone else who collected the data and then reported it. For the same reason, I think it's valuable to have a town board liaison. The problem with that is there may be a perception of influence by either the conversation or the town board liaison wants one thing and the group wants something else. So I think there's a potential of influencing with the liaison, and I would be comfortable with the facilitator running the meeting if we had a good format for communicating clearly. Because I don't want a summary, I want the raw data. Maybe if we could watch the meeting, I don't know. I think recording referring back to the Transportation Advisory Board meetings, when those meetings were recorded, sometimes you got a different perspective of what happened at the meetings than when you read the minutes. Same goes for a board meeting. When you can watch it for yourself and collect the data, then you make a judgment. And then I think the community weighs in. So I don't think I've told you anything yet. I think we need to limit the independence of these groups if we establish them, and by allowing them to establish the hierarchy, the bylaws, the way they operate, I think that is shooting ourselves in the foot, and Frank was right, just collect the information and run with it. A facilitator, I think, would remove some of the perceived bias if there were specific representatives. So I could go either way on an ad hoc group, and I can see a fair number of reasons not to do it that way, and to hear from the community as a larger whole. So I would probably lean away from this and go towards a broader collection of information from the community. Did that answer any of your questions?
It did, and it actually triggered another thought that I don't want the board or the community to feel like this is going to be our one tool, it's going to be our hammer that we're hitting nails with.
If it was one of the ways, and I think we have to look at each issue, whether it's a little tight technical conversation or a transportation for the next 40 years. I think that those should be approached differently, but I think that this is an excellent tool for some of the issues we deal with, and I think we should set up the framework to establish this when we vote that we need this advice.
I think, and I should have led with this, the core challenge that we're trying to resolve here, frankly, the core challenge that representative democracy is trying to solve is how do you distill the 6,000, frankly, the 11 to 12,000 taking the valley opinions of what Estes Park should be. How do you distill those in such a way that you all get an accurate picture of how the community feels about a particular issue? There's no one solution, and frankly, there isn't a solution unless we're a hive mind of ants. There's not one solution that's going to do the job. It's going to be an amalgamation of your understanding as representative elected officials. It's going to be the election results. It's going to be the community survey results. It's going to be conversations you have in the grocery store. The task that you all have put before you is the most challenging task in this community, which is to distill these, everybody has different opinions, so 22,000 opinions, because people shift, into actionable intelligence. And I think the more tools you have in the toolbox to do that, the better off you're going to be at trying to suss out what the will of the community is when you're looking at, you're being elected to represent them, and trying to understand with our limited abilities as human beings what 11,000 people want.
When you look at some of the historical minutes, or when we look back at some of the records in the newspaper about town meetings and big issues, in the early days there was a town meeting, and if you had an opinion, you spoke up. And there has been a tendency, and I'm sure this is rooted in some great idea, that we get better opinions when we're not all in one group or something like that. But I sure miss the opportunity to say, we're meeting on Wednesday night at 6 to talk about A, B, or C. And if you have an opinion, we'll come down and sign up if you want to talk. That, for me, does a couple of things. If you say something, I heard you say it and I can hold you accountable for it. It's also reducing the amount of hearsay that, well, over at table 4, they said this, and at table 1, they said something different. It gives some accountability. I would like to see us create that opportunity for the public to be part of a single conversation. And we have town board meetings, twice a month. We could do that, but not on single issues. So I have noticed that trend away from it to reduce the number of voices that are heard at one time. But I think that's been counterproductive in the area of trust of government and of my fellow citizen. So I would like to have an opportunity to go back to that on big issues.
I like that, and I think that's a separate conversation actually from this. I call it the Jaws Town Hall method, where the whole town shows up and there you go.
And that's exactly what I was gonna say. I don't think we can sit here tonight and say, this is the only tool that we're gonna use when trying to get opinions and work things out. I think it's an important one to have and to know how we're gonna structure it. And depending upon the subject and depending upon the effect that it has on our community, is, okay, we implement this or we go to something bigger like, you know, what we're doing with the development code. So I totally agree, but I just wanted to say that's exactly what I was thinking when Mark was speaking about, you know, having both is my vote.
I agree with everybody here. I think that, I think we're talking about different things. We're talking about different tools in the toolbox, and this is not the only one there. I think this has a particular use. I don't know where all of a sudden we decided it was 7 people. A focus group could be as large as we decide to appoint it to be. So it doesn't have to be a small group. I see this as replacing some of the advisory groups for particularly something that takes repetitive meetings to work up something and come up with something, to have a random group of citizens come in to try and develop something, and you have a different group every time, you don't have that continuity as you're developing something. So for some things like developing a transportation plan or something, to get the plan out there, you need some focus of the same people who have that knowledge and they grow and work together. That doesn't say that later on we don't have a full town meeting of everybody who wants to come and that tool as well, and go through some type of large public process of the people involved. It all has to be customly made. If we're going to do development of informed consent, we need to use the different tools that fit the different places. So I think for that particular use, which the idea was, is this kind of replaces those ongoing advisory boards, but they're not, I never saw this as something that would replace something like the restorative justice is doing with the development plan. It's just, this is a hammer, that's a saw, we need a drill, we need all those things in our toolbox to use them all. And if we only concentrate on one of them, we're not gonna do a good job. So, yeah, I think you're good. I think make some good comments about the town board liaison thing. I could go either way on that. I do think there needs to be a staff person there to facilitate, there's the facilitator and then there's a coordinator, which are 2 different roles. There needs to be somebody there to keep the train on the tracks and somebody else to talk about where you're going. So I think there needs to be somebody there to take responsibility for putting together and not just the group itself. And then the other thing, when we talk about a charter, maybe not bylaws, but I do think the definition of that charter and what the subject is to set up those guide rails is what they're talking about. Because one of the issues we had with some of the advisory boards is they would have a subject, and then when that was done, they'd start wandering off on other directions and scope creep. So I think having a standard charter, and part of that charter would be where we would define, this is what we want you to work on. Stay within these lanes and we'll be fine. So we don't get that scope creep and get into the other areas.
I don't want to be particularly repetitive. I do agree with the comments. I do think there are different structures for different subjects. And so I think we need something for a town hall meeting, just an overall town hall meeting. And we also need work groups in certain areas that require more technical or specific looking at it. So I don't think we're going to really know what this looks like until we appoint one. And I would be, the one only other comment is I'd be very reluctant to use our process for appointing members of this that's similar to what we do, like when we appoint members to the housing authority or to, Visit Estes Park or any of that. I think we need to be more inclusive that seems like it fits within a specific bucket that we're trying to come up with something that seems to me to be broader than that. And so, I don't know, I'd like a more open appointment process.
I just want to add a couple of comments and then I know we're coming up on time. One is I think it's a totally fair point that it's one of many tools in the toolbox. I mean, it's the same reason we don't put a survey out for every single thing we do, but we do for the larger projects or for things that we are trying to do a deep dive on. I do think we have to consider that we can't have every single tool in the toolbox. We're not going to own every wrench. We're not going to own every type of hammer. We're not going to own every drill bit. We have to prioritize staff time and capacity, as well as our ability to input info based on, the type of project, the magnitude of it, that kind of thing. So I think it's totally reasonable to say this is one of the many tools in the toolbox. I'm also thinking about how many tools can we have with our budget and our staff size and our, agenda and those kinds of things. I think that's just a piece of it for me. I also think I should have led with this in my comments, that I think in the same way we're saying, okay, what's the trigger for when we may want to consider an ad hoc focus group? What's the cap for when we say, okay, this is too big for a group of whatever? I think we don't want a task force of 50 people or 20 people even. I think we're talking about small groups that can be effective in the time they're given. But I think when we're thinking about this, we should also consider, okay, at what point is the top end when we say, okay, now we do want to do something like the development code update process or whatever, where more people can come to the table. And finally, I think as you're coming forward with, based on the direction you've received tonight and you're bringing something back to us, I just want to be really aware of how, in my opinion, what we're talking about is designed around certain privileges in our community in terms of language barriers, in terms of time that people have, when the meetings may be held, who's able to come at 2:00 on a Wednesday, or if it's in an evening or whatever. I think some of those things, when we are developing those focus groups and identifying, okay, we need a focus group for this issue, that's going to be a big piece for me is, are we eliminating a voice in our community simply by the structure of how it's been, placed? And I think that is something I'll be attentive to. I'm not really sure how you address that in the actual, in what you're requesting here. And I do think it's something we need to consider by nature. I think what we're talking about is going to bring certain people to the table who have that privilege of being able to do that, and will probably isolate others who might not. So just a thought.
Okay.
Mayor, and Trustee Hazelton, I think that is a good point. When we're looking at these relative to resources across the organization, relative to our size, I think it's important that we directly tie it to the conversation we have been having about maybe the need to slow down the pace of certain, like the number of things we're doing at one time. And that's hard to do because we have a very motivated staff. We know that the board is interested in moving forward on critical projects. The more initiatives we have going on at any given time, the harder it is to use all of those tools in our toolbox. So in my eyes, it all ties back to a discussion that I've been having with Public Information Officer Miller about how we're building that engagement consideration into the town board strategic planning process to make sure that when a project or an initiative is requiring an intensive effort like the development code, that we have freed up the resources to do it, even if that means saying no to something else that we really want to get done. And I think you're going to see more of that as we head into next year and into future years is how do we structure this such that when we have a big community impact project like the development code, we have sufficient staff resources, sufficient organizational resources to have focus groups, to have town hall style meetings, to have community conversations with the restorative justice and the library, and things that we haven't even talked about. New types of engagement. There's a million different options, but we need the time to do it. And the only way we get time in a limited financial environment is by ruthlessly prioritizing the things that we're focusing on. So it's a point well taken, and I suspect this process, this tool will have built into it consideration of, is this the only way we're engaging the public on this topic, or are there other elements where we're trying to pull out information?
Ruthlessly prioritizing. I love that. Do you have sufficient information to kind of prioritize the next shape?
I do, yes, thank you.
Yeah. All right, then, we'll move on. Future study session items. Travis, do you have items to, the other Travis?
I don't believe I have any items for town board consideration tonight, Mayor.
Okay, Trustee Brown.
Well, we were going to do something about the Supreme Court decision on noise ordinances, the Colorado Supreme Court.
So
and that
as an
seems
executive
like-
session, yes, I talked to Attorney Kramer, and it's likely going to be early next year.
Okay. But that wasn't on the list. That's why I was wondering.
Yeah, so not as a study session, that will be, again, in
it'll be
an
an
executive
executive
session
session.
that Attorney Kramer and I will schedule. And I believe Attorney Kramer is still on.
Yeah.
But we had talked about early next
Okay.
year.
I had a new one I'd like to bring up. I've talked to staff about this a little bit, and that's with the line between a mural and a sign. And it's getting to be more and more of an issue, and it's been an issue for a long time. It was years ago when there was an issue with the Christmas shop. They made them paint over their mural. I thought it was wrong at the time or afterwards, but we've had a couple of them come up now, and I would like us to talk about that sooner than later, because I think murals add a lot to a community, and I love them in town, and they look good. And I think we ought to be incentivizing that and the beautification, but there's a point where does a mural become a sign? And right now, it's pretty tight.
Or when does a mural become an advertisement,
Exactly.
advertising sign? Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
Exactly. And I hate to see us going out there and telling people to paint over stuff. On the other hand, I don't want to see people getting around the sign code by saying, "Oh, it's a mural. Shop here, save this Thursday and paint the whole side of their building." But it's not well defined, and I'd like us to talk about that. We've talked about some ideas, and I know staff has been talking about it, but I wanted to bring it up for the whole board, because there are about 3 or 4 incidents of this going on in town right now. And in some cases, I don't want us to be the bad guys that are painting over murals that look great in town, or discouraging businesses from painting murals on their businesses.
Town attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd be happy to help the Community Development Department with that to the extent they need it. I just wanted to chime in and say, don't expect that to be a satisfying conversation, because the line between what is an advertisement and what is art is going to be very hard to define. And it's just a challenging conversation.
Okay. I think that concludes our study session. This session is adjourned. We'll be back at